Hello, dear viewers of my video. I hope you enjoy watching it and look forward to your feedback in the comments. I'd always known I wasn't the kind of woman people remembered in rooms full of power. Not because I lacked presence. I knew how to carry myself, how to speak clearly, how to dress with quiet confidence, but because I never chased the spotlight. I preferred to control the light itself. That morning, I wore a tailored navy dress, understated pearl earrings, and heels just high enough to demand posture. My hair, chestnut and glossy, was pinned into a low twist, and I'd rehearsed every transition slide on the master presentation at least 14 times. We were set to host 11 CEOs, each representing global firms in energy, logistics, infrastructure, and AI, who had flown in specifically to sign a historic $2.1 billion cooperative agreement. I'd organized every single detail of the event: the agenda, the press briefings, the private one-on-one dinners, even the scent wafting through the conference hall. A carefully measured balance of sandalwood and citrus was my decision. They called me the veteran at my company. 15 years of spotless execution, quiet loyalty, and more than a few late-night saves that no one acknowledged. That morning, I felt calm. Not proud, not nervous, just steady. Until she took the microphone. Danielle, the newest supervisor in our department, stood tall at the podium, hair like a shampoo commercial, voice polished and precise. She had been with us barely 6 months. Younger, louder, and as I'd recently discovered, deeply ambitious in the most dangerous way. She tapped the mic gently, the room hushed. I was standing just off stage, with the final folder in my hand, the one with the updated signing protocols, when her voice cut clean through the hum of espresso machines and polite international greetings. "Before we begin today's partnership ceremony," she said, flashing her teeth like a model at a product launch, "a quick internal announcement." I paused mid-step, already frowning. The CEOs turned toward her, expecting some light opening remarks. "As of this morning," she continued, "Maria Keller will be stepping away from the project, effective immediately." Silence. A few people shifted in their seats, confused. My heart didn't race, not yet. It just stopped. "We've decided to move in a new direction," Danielle said, with an ease that made my stomach churn. "To align our vision with a younger, more agile voice for our next decade of innovation. Maria's contributions have been appreciated. Security will assist with her transition." I didn't move. For a second, I thought it might be some cruel mistake. A misread calendar, a wrong name. But then I saw her smile tighten slightly, and I understood. It wasn't a mistake. It was a performance. She had planned this, every detail, down to the exact timing, so she could stand on the stage I built and declare that I was no longer needed. I looked around. 11 CEOs in $1,000 suits. PR cameras rolling silently from the corners. My own team seated neatly at the back, eyes wide. No one said anything. Security approached, gently, almost apologetically. I nodded once, then handed the folder, the final blueprint of my 6-month strategy, to Danielle, who accepted it like a passing waiter. As I turned to leave, my eyes caught the banner above the entry arch. "Transforming tomorrow, together." The irony nearly made me laugh. I passed the hospitality table, where the almond flour pastries I'd ordered for our gluten-sensitive guests were being arranged. The floral displays, an elegant pairing of blue orchids and white ranunculus, had been flown in from a boutique in Barcelona. Everything they saw today, everything that made them believe this company was competent, visionary, and trustworthy, was mine. But now it belonged to Danielle. At least, that's what she thought. Because she didn't know what I knew. Danielle had stepped into a house that looked glamorous on the surface, but its foundation? I had built it. I had curated every client relationship. I was the one who flew to Singapore to resolve a shipping dispute in person when no one else wanted to deal with customs. I had memorized the preferences of each CEO. Charles from Oslo only drank lemon tea. Ramesh from Mumbai had a seafood allergy. Lin from Shenzhen expected a handwritten note before every negotiation. These were not details written in any file. They were relationships earned quietly over years of presence. And Danielle? She had just pulled out the central beam in front of all of them, thinking she'd made a power move. But what she had done was ignite a silent countdown, one that she wouldn't hear until it exploded. As I stepped through the side door and felt the cool air of the back corridor wash over me, I pulled out my phone. No anger, just clarity. I opened a secure app I had developed years ago, back when I first realized how replaceable people like me appeared on paper. I'd never planned to use it. But betrayal makes you reconsider quiet tools. I typed one sentence. Phase 1 complete. Initiate pivot. Then I pressed send. Back in the hall, Danielle began her presentation using my slides, my staging, my structure. She smiled at the room like she had built the kingdom herself. What she didn't realize was that the real signatures, the real trust, were never tied to the slides or the branding. They were tied to me. And by the time the contracts reached the table, without my voice, my final confirmation, or my coded validation keys, the CEOs would begin to wonder what exactly they were signing. That's when the unraveling would begin. Looking back, the signs were there for months, subtle at first, wrapped in compliments that felt more like carefully sharpened paper cuts. Danielle arrived like a storm in a silk blouse, all energy, optimism, and corporate buzzwords. Brand synergy, identity refresh, next-gen market positioning. I heard those phrases on repeat, sometimes laced through casual hallway conversations, sometimes slipped into Monday meetings like sugar into bitter coffee. But underneath every glowing phrase was a message directed only at me. You've had your time, now step aside. It started with harmless suggestions. Maybe we update the presentation template, something sleeker, more millennial-friendly. I nodded. Fine. Every brand needs polish now and then. But then came the design agency proposals, the new color schemes, the spontaneous team vision workshops scheduled on Fridays, during hours she knew I reserved for direct partner calls. Then she changed the title of our quarterly report from Legacy Partnerships Review to Emerging Market Leadership. She called it Semantic Alignment. I called it the start of a quiet erasure. She'd float around the office with that pleasant, media-trained smile, putting her hand lightly on the shoulders of junior staff as she asked things like, "What's your dream title in 5 years?" Or, "If you could reinvent this department, what would you do differently?" Always using the word differently, never better, just enough to plant ideas. She wasn't asking for change. She was guiding it like a conductor, subtly shifting loyalties in rooms I'd once led. I still remember the first time she said it out loud. "We need fresh energy," she told our department heads during a strategy sync, eyes skating over me as if I were just another artifact in the room. Our global image feels a little anchored. We should feel like we're leading, not just holding ground. Anchored. A word meant to sound steady, but in her voice, it meant heavy, old, in the way. I smiled politely, said nothing, and moved on to the next item on the agenda. But I wrote it down. I always wrote everything down. By the 3rd month, she had taken over our media engagements, replaced my contact at the European Innovation Council with a younger PR associate she claimed had a sharper digital voice. Slowly, the direct threads I'd maintained with key figures in Singapore, Zurich, and Dubai were rerouted through updated communication chains. But every time something slipped through the cracks, a wrong name on a press release, a missed invitation to a dinner I had personally confirmed, I was the one they still called. "Maria," they would say, "we're confused. Is Danielle your assistant? Number not even close." What Danielle never understood, or maybe what she underestimated, was that experience in international business isn't something you list on a resume. It lives in how you navigate late-night time zones and conflicting trade laws. It's knowing when not to speak in a Tokyo boardroom and when to insist during a Berlin procurement dispute. And it's especially knowing the difference between building a deal and performing one. Danielle wanted the applause. She was rehearsing for a stage she didn't know how to stand on. But what stung wasn't just that she wanted to replace me. It was how she did it. Not in a private meeting, not even with a cold email, but in front of every name I had worked to bring to the table. That was the part I hadn't expected. The spectacle. I'd suspected the coup. Of course I had. It was clear when she moved my desk closer to operations for synergy. It was clear when she stopped copying me on meeting notes and began presenting my negotiation briefs as team outcomes. It was clear the moment she scheduled an off-site strategy day without inviting me, then asked afterward if I could summarize the action points for alignment. But I thought I'd have a chance to respond, to confront, to leave with dignity, if nothing else. I was wrong, because she didn't just want the job. She wanted the crown, the applause, and most importantly, to prove that she could take my place in full view of the people who trusted me most. And that was her mistake. Because she had assumed those people were here for the brand, for the corporate narrative she'd polished and pinned to the front of the partnership deck. She didn't realize they were here because of me. It wasn't my name on the logo, but it was my number they dialed when logistics stalled in Morocco, when a materials shipment sat frozen at the Rotterdam port, when a regulatory meeting in Seoul needed someone who could hold a firm but diplomatic line. I wasn't listed on the cover of the contract, but I was the reason the signatures were even on the table. I wasn't the face of the company. I was the handshake. And that's what Danielle never learned. Branding can get you to the table, but only trust keeps you in the room. So when she humiliated me in front of 11 CEOs, she didn't just fire me, she triggered a recalibration. And I knew the fallout wouldn't be instant, but it would be sharp, quiet at first, then unmistakable. Because those relationships weren't bound to company ink. They were bound to history, 2 years of personal accountability, of follow-through, of answering the phone at 2 a.m. when someone's entire supply chain was at risk and they didn't want to speak to a new contact. She thought she had replaced a title, but she'd removed the linchpin, and it wouldn't take long for the room to realize the foundation was already starting to shift. They thought I would crumble, walk out the back door, crushed and humiliated, reduced to a footnote in the company's glossy timeline of success. What they didn't know, what Danielle didn't even think to ask, was that 6 months earlier, I had already prepared for this moment, not out of paranoia, out of experience. You don't survive 15 years of international negotiations without learning that deals can collapse over things as small as a changed calendar date or an unfamiliar signature. When the stakes reach billions, words matter, but context matters more. It's not just what you say, it's who says it, and who listens, and who they trust. It started quietly. A line in an early draft, tucked into Section 7 under a subheading labeled Continuity of Lead Representation. I called it a diplomatic continuity condition. Most people would have skipped it. Most people did, all except me. I didn't insert it with any fanfare. I simply raised it during a strategy session, turning the conversation gently toward reputational alignment. When we talk about global trust, I said, we don't just mean market confidence. We're talking about relationships that hinge on familiarity, continuity, human consistency. Then I spoke to each of the 11 CEOs individually in the months that followed, over quiet lunches, in early morning Zoom calls, sometimes while walking between airports. I knew their pressure points. I understood how they thought. To Lynn, who had once pulled out of a 9-figure deal because the new negotiator lacked cultural fluency, I said, this clause protects your comfort. You're not betting on a company, you're betting on consistency. To Ramesh, who had built his empire on long-term loyalty, I framed it simply. Would you sign $1 billion agreement if someone suddenly removed your counterpart without explanation? To Charles, I asked directly, how would you feel if I disappeared during negotiations? Would you sign the deal anyway? Each one paused. Each one nodded. One by one, they all agreed. The clause was simple. In the event that the chief negotiator, defined by name, by role, and by date, was removed or replaced before the contract signing, all agreements were automatically void. It was framed as a stability mechanism, a safeguard to ensure the integrity of each party's expectations. No legal tricks, no small print, just trust. It was the kind of clause that only someone like me could get approved, because I'd built enough trust over the years that no one questioned my motives. They knew I was protecting the relationship, not manipulating it. Except Damien. He never read it. He signed the updated documents 2 weeks after joining as CMO, eyes fixed on the branding decks and high-gloss renderings of the press conference banners. He was captivated by the color palette, the strategic lighting angles, the font selection. The signature page? He flipped to it without hesitation and scrawled his name while muttering, "This partnership is going to look amazing on our Q4 covers." I watched in silence. Danielle had delegated the approval process to him, pretending to streamline things while conveniently removing herself from legal review. And that, right there, sealed their fate. Not with malice, not even with strategy, just neglect. They were too obsessed with the optics to read the foundation. So when Danielle dismissed me in front of the world's most powerful partners, she didn't just replace a negotiator. She triggered a legal kill switch embedded inside the contract, one that each CEO had already acknowledged and signed. The moment she declared my removal, every agreement, every dollar, every promise, every cross-border commitment collapsed quietly, cleanly, and legally. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to retaliate. The documents spoke for me. And as I stepped into the quiet hallway outside the grand meeting room, I could already feel the change in air. I imagined the moment Lynn would open her copy of the draft and reread Section 7. The furrow in Charles' brow as his assistant whispered what the clause meant. The sudden flurry of side conversations as each executive realized Danielle had just removed the only reason they were still at the table. Not because I was irreplaceable in title, but because I was the thread they all trusted. And that clause, so dry, so technical, would now become the most explosive sentence in the building. Back in the boardroom, Danielle likely smiled into the camera, clicking through my slides. She probably hadn't noticed that half the seats had gone still, that a few executives were scrolling through PDFs on their tablets, that 3 interpreters had quietly stepped away from their booths, because while she chased the performance, the show, the applause, the CEOs were remembering who actually made the calls that brought them here. Me. And thanks to a clause she never noticed, the only person who could finalize the deal had just been escorted out. I waited at the elevator, calm. No rush. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Lynn's number, then Ramesh, then an unknown number from Dubai. I let it ring, because the beauty of a well-written clause is that it doesn't scream. It doesn't argue. It just does what it was designed to do, quietly unravel everything when trust is broken. And now, the real negotiations were about to begin. For most people, signatures are ceremonial. The flourish at the end of a document, the final nod of approval, symbolic, satisfying, and ultimately forgettable. But in my world, where billions shifted hands with a single click, signatures weren't gestures. They were infrastructure. 3 years ago, after a near-catastrophic oversight involving a duplicated contract sent to 2 competing clients, I built something. Not a workaround, a safeguard. A second level of protection so silent and seamless that even our internal counsel forgot it existed. It was a verification protocol hidden inside our contract management system. Buried under layers of technical architecture was one immutable rule. No contract could be executed without my encrypted digital signature. Not a typed name, not a scanned file. A live biometric-coded signature generated through a secured key device that never left my possession. I carried it daily. A small black capsule, no bigger than a USB stick, with no visible branding and no wireless access. My private keystone. The encryption was custom-built. The algorithm couldn't be cloned. The key phrase that activated it, a 17-character passphrase, was never written anywhere, not even in my personal notes. And even if someone did find a way to replicate the structure, Bypassing it would immediately trigger a legal alert to a third-party firm I'd retained on retainer since the day the system went live. It wasn't paranoia, it was survival. At the time, I knew better than to trust that long-term recognition would always align with long-term value. So, I encoded the one thing no one could fake: my final approval. That morning, as Danielle waved to the crowd with my clicker in her hand, I knew she believed she'd won. She thought she'd pulled off the perfect coup: public, brutal, and irreversible. But she was still operating on surface-level control: optics, titles, room dynamics. She didn't know the real deal-breaker was sitting quietly inside my handbag. No signature, no deal, no exception. And she would find that out soon enough. Back when we finalized the draft agreements with the 11 partner CEOs, I had explained the protocol in simple, direct terms. No technical jargon, just clarity. "I'm the final key," I'd said in a closed-door session with the Zurich delegation. "My signature is the last lock. It ensures that what you sign today is exactly what we discussed yesterday. No substitutions, no reversals." They agreed, relieved, even impressed. It gave them certainty that no junior manager or flashy new hire could slip something past the final checkpoint. It made them feel protected. And today, that same protection would destroy Danielle's illusion of power. Because even if the CEOs hadn't walked out, even if they'd chosen to ignore the continuity clause, she still couldn't close the deal. She didn't have my approval, and the system knew that. Without the encrypted timestamp linked to my personal device, the back end of our contract platform wouldn't release the final document for execution. Instead, it would stall in pending authorization mode, frozen in a digital purgatory. And the moment anyone attempted to override the safeguard or issue a fake signature, a legal team from Adler and Rowe, a firm that owed me a few personal favors, would be notified. I hadn't told anyone about this, not even my closest assistant, because the point of a real safeguard isn't to threaten, it's to exist. Now, as I walked through the lobby and felt my device gently shift inside my bag, I knew with certainty Danielle's presentation was a hollow show. She could talk, she could pose, she could even get a few polite handshakes from the CEOs who didn't want to create a scene. But she couldn't seal a single agreement, because there was no key, and I wasn't coming back. The elevator dinged behind me. I stepped outside into the sunlit courtyard, already knowing what would come next. Within 15 minutes, they'd realize the signing process was stuck. The system would flag missing validation key. Someone from legal would panic and call ET. ET would call operations. Operations would call Danielle. And Danielle, now sweating under the heat of expectation, would demand a manual override, which of course wouldn't work. And then, when someone finally thought to check the code logs, they'd see the lockout clause. They'd see the email notifications sent to Adler and Rowe's servers. And Danielle would have her first glimpse of the trap she never saw coming. I sat on a bench near the fountain, just outside the building. Birds chirped. A child tugged on her mother's arm. Life moved on. My phone buzzed again. 10 missed calls. One from Damien, no doubt realizing that the glossy campaign he planned to post on LinkedIn was now legally worthless. One from someone in operations. And finally, one from a number I recognized instantly. Gideon, our CEO. I didn't answer. Because the meeting was over, and so was the illusion. Danielle had removed the negotiator, but hadn't removed the signature. She'd dismantled the face of the deal without ever finding its spine. And now, there was no path forward. Not because I fought back, but because I planned ahead. There are silences that hum with respect, silences that pulse with tension, and then there are silences, like the one that filled that grand conference room the moment I stepped out. Not a cough, not a shuffle, not even the clink of a glass. Just stillness, thick, loaded, and irreversible. Danielle, still holding the presentation remote like it gave her actual power, tried to continue. She clicked forward to the next slide, her voice catching just slightly before recovering. As we finalize this historic agreement, I want to emphasize the new direction our company is taking. Fresh energy, unified branding, next-generation solutions. She paused, expecting nods, approval, applause. Instead, she was met with stares. Cold, calculating. 11 CEOs, each seasoned in their own industries, now suddenly quiet in a way that no longer resembled politeness. The man from Oslo, Victor Halden, was the first to break the silence. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand. He simply closed his folder with a soft snap, turned to his aide, and murmured something inaudible. Then he looked up, not at Danielle, but at the now empty chair I had been sitting in less than 10 minutes ago. "There appears to be a procedural violation," he said crisply. "Our agreement clearly specifies continuity of negotiation. The absence of Ms. Keller invalidates the memorandum under Clause 7, Danielle blinked. We're moving forward under new leadership. That clause was more of a formality, not a binding constraint." Halden didn't respond. He simply reached into his briefcase, withdrew a single sheet of paper, and signed it. His aide took it and walked it directly to the assistant seated at the front of the room. "Oslo terminates participation," Halden said, standing. "Effective immediately." The room shifted like a domino table tipping over. The delegation from São Paulo followed next. Marcela Souza stood slowly, her dark eyes steady. "Clause 7 was explained to us with care," she said. "Maria ensured we understood it fully, in our language, with proper legal interpretation. We relied on that clarity. And now, it's gone." She tapped her pen once against her closed folder, a subtle but deliberate sound, then placed the pen squarely on the table before walking away. A quiet, final gesture. She didn't look back. Danielle's mouth parted. No words came. The delegation from Singapore rose together, no explanation offered. They simply left their documents unopened and their nameplates turned face down. Then, Munich. Always precise, always watching. Their spokesperson muttered something in German before folding the executive brief in half and tucking it back into its binder. The rest of the delegation followed, leaving behind nothing but a sealed envelope and a pen. Still uncapped, ink exposed, as if poised for a signature that would never come. Danielle tried to intervene. "Please, let's be reasonable. There are fallback provisions we can implement." But her voice was background noise now, static against the reality unfolding in front of her. I stood just beyond the glass, visible through the tall conference room windows. Not inside, not involved, just present. That was all I needed to be, because my absence inside that room had already become louder than any protest I could have voiced. Gideon, our CEO, stood in the back corner, arms crossed, mouth tight. He hadn't moved. He hadn't said a word. But his eyes flicked between Danielle and the slowly emptying room with the kind of restrained fury that only comes from witnessing a carefully constructed empire start to burn. Not from external forces, but from one of his own. She looked to him once, desperate, a flicker of panic now leaking into her expression. He didn't look back. By now, more than half the attendees had left. Some quietly, some with brief, symbolic gestures. A closed laptop, a folder slid across the table. A chair pushed in with more precision than necessary. The Singapore team left their invitation cards in a neat stack on the table, face down, names hidden. It was diplomacy by gesture. The message was clear. Without Maria, there is no deal. Danielle stepped forward, voice shaking now. "We can re-establish contact. Perhaps we can schedule follow-ups individually." But no one was listening anymore. She had lost the room. Worse, she had lost the room in complete silence. And I didn't move. I didn't wave. I didn't smirk. That wasn't necessary. Because the decision had already been made, not by me, not by a memo, but by trust. By every conversation I had held late into foreign time zones, by every crisis I'd resolved without press, by every tiny moment I had remembered someone's child's name or someone's mother's surgery. The unspoken moments that aren't part of any formal negotiation, but are the only thing that actually makes them possible. Danielle had never built those bridges. She had only rehearsed the speech for when she arrived on the other side. And now, she stood alone on her stage, microphone on, spotlight blazing, but no audience left to impress. I remained still, watching from the glass. A single breath, a full exhale. Then I turned away, because there was nothing more to see. The house she tried to steal had already collapsed, quietly, efficiently, without a single door slammed, just pens, folders, silence, and a woman in navy standing still, having already won without saying a word. Danielle didn't panic right away. For the first 10 minutes after the walkouts began, she still believed it could be salvaged. She turned to her assistant, requested a conference call with legal, and ordered a statement drafted, emphasizing transitional leadership. Her voice, though higher than usual, still carried the tone of someone trying to spin events, not confront them. But then the calls began. Not from me, not from the executives, from the lawyers. The in-house legal team, rattled by the collapse they'd just witnessed, combed through the contracts in real time. The moment they reached paragraph 14, the clause labeled Final Validation and Encrypted Authorization Protocol, the mood in their offices shifted from confusion to dread. The lead counsel, a man named Avery, who'd once told me I was too thorough to be efficient, was the first to speak up. "We have a problem," he said flatly into the speakerphone as Danielle stood over the conference table. "What kind of problem?" she snapped, already losing her patience. "Just issue a new execution order. We'll reinitiate the documentation. I'll sign on behalf of leadership." Avery cleared his throat, carefully. "You can't." Danielle's eyes narrowed. "Why not?" "Paragraph 14, he said. "The final validation requires the biometric digital signature of the original lead negotiator." Maria Keller Danielle waved a hand dismissively. "We'll remove the clause. Redraft it." "You can't do that either," Avery continued, now with the slow precision of someone spelling out a disaster to a child. "The clause is embedded into the distributed digital ledger linked to every execution file. There is no back-end override, no administrative bypass. It was built that way intentionally." Danielle went pale. "And furthermore," Avery added, "any attempt to simulate or bypass the signature triggers a breach notice to Keller's legal representatives. The alert's already been sent. If we try anything, and I mean anything, without her approval, we're not just talking about invalid contracts. We're talking about liability, public liability, potential fraud." The air in the room shifted. This was no longer a PR inconvenience. This was collapse. The worst part? It wasn't even noisy. Danielle didn't scream. She just stood there, still, her hands frozen mid-gesture as her carefully staged future fell apart in absolute silence. Outside, the media team, still waiting for press photos, was beginning to realize there was no event left to cover. No champagne toast. No joint statement. No signatures. Executives had left the building. The only thing remaining were empty chairs, sealed folders, and a few pens lying neatly on the table like tombstones. Then the second wave hit. The phone started ringing again. This time, not from inside, but from the partner offices. Zurich, Singapore, São Paulo. One after another, the messages were the same. "We are pausing future collaboration due to executive instability." Some were formal, others brutal in their brevity. "Withdrawn. Pending structural reevaluation. No confidence in current leadership." Danielle tried to issue a counter-message. She called the head of communications and dictated a short statement. Today's ceremony marked an exciting transition toward next-generation leadership. "We are revisiting our collaborative roadmap to align with dynamic restructuring." It was hollow. Too clean, too polished. And by the time she hit send, no one cared. Because people were already leaving. Guests, media, staff. Even Gideon, our CEO, had disappeared from the rear of the conference room, slipping away, without offering Danielle so much as a glance. He didn't stop to comfort. He didn't offer strategy. He just left her there, alone, in the middle of her stage, beneath a screen that still displayed the title slide I had written 3 weeks ago. Global Partnership Summit 2025. Built on Trust. Outside, I stood in the marble atrium, watching the slow dispersal through the glass doors. I saw them carry out the gift boxes I had personally curated. I saw the camera crew pack up their equipment without having filmed a single frame worth keeping. I saw a janitor quietly begin pulling down the branded banners, leaving the walls bare once again. I didn't rush. There was no need. Danielle wasn't defeated by confrontation. She wasn't undone by drama. She was dismantled by her own oversight. She thought removing me would elevate her. Instead, it erased everything she thought she'd inherited. And the truth is, I never had to fight her. I just had to leave. Because once I walked out, the system, legal, diplomatic, and emotional, did the rest. I walked slowly toward the exit, the weight of my handbag, and the tiny, silent keystone inside, a comfortable reminder of the control I still held. Not over her, not even over the company, over the narrative, over the truth. The building buzzed with half conversations, half excuses, but it no longer felt like a workplace. It felt like a stage being torn down after a failed performance. As I passed the security guard, he nodded. Respectful, a little uncertain. I smiled faintly, then stepped out into the late afternoon sun. Behind me, Danielle was still trying to salvage what was already gone. And I was finally free. The air outside felt cooler than it should have. It always did after moments like that, when a chapter closed so cleanly it left no residue. I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I was walking, slowly, like someone who had already made peace with the ending and was ready, finally, to begin again. I had only reached the edge of the courtyard when my phone buzzed. Unknown number, Zurich. I paused for a second, debating. Then I answered. Maria Keller. A pause. Then a familiar voice, low, precise, and always deliberate with his words. Ms. Keller, this is Mr. Reinhardt. Of course, CEO of Helvetia Group, one of the largest logistics conglomerates in Europe. I'd negotiated his firm's initial entry into South American ports 3 years ago. He was a man who never called unless something mattered. I watched what happened this morning, he said. No greetings, no small talk. Let me be clear. I have no interest in negotiating with unstable leadership, nor am I interested in allowing bureaucratic ambition to compromise operations again. I said nothing. So here's my offer, he continued. We want you to become an independent strategic advisor to our expansion board, full diplomatic authority. You report only to me. Terms are negotiable, but we're prepared to match and exceed your previous salary structure by 40%. I exhaled once, carefully. He wasn't asking me to return to the table. He was offering me a seat of my own. Thank you, I said quietly. I'll consider it. We'll wait exactly 48 hours, he replied, but not a moment longer. We believe in momentum. The line went dead. I hadn't even taken 5 more steps when the second call came. Munich. This one I recognized immediately. Ingrid Stein, CFO of Drestor Industrial. Sharp, famously skeptical, and someone who never offered compliments unless they were backed by numbers. I hope I'm the first, she said dryly. Second, I replied. Damn. Then, without preamble, we're dissolving our previous engagement. The clause was clear. And frankly, the way they handled your dismissal was insulting to every serious player in that room. We don't sign chaos. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. We want you to lead our next negotiation cycle, she said. Not as their representative, as ours. External consultant, executive decision power. You build the terms. You speak for us. No oversight. Munich signs only if Keller leads. It wasn't just another job. It was an invitation to architect something, with complete authority. I appreciate the offer, I told her. You'd better, she said, and hung up. I stood still for a moment, stunned more by the calmness inside me than the offers themselves. Because this wasn't ambition knocking. This was recognition. Then the third buzz came. This time, a message. Sender. V. Sloan. Only one line. $800 million on the table. Contract pending. But only if Maria Keller returns as chief negotiator. I stared at the screen. Vince Sloan, lead investor for the International Infrastructure Coalition. He never spoke to anyone outside closed meetings. His office didn't call people. His signature was known to shift entire portfolios. And now he was putting $800 million into play. With one condition. Me. 3 messages. 3 doors reopened. But this time, they didn't just open into roles. They opened into power. Control. Not the performative kind Danielle had clutched with white knuckles. Press kits and titles and flashbulb authority. No. This was the kind of control that couldn't be printed or faked. It was earned presence. Presence that made investors pause. That made deals hinge. That made 11 CEOs walk away without a word because one person wasn't at the table. Me. And in that moment, I realized something far bigger than any number attached to an offer. I wasn't returning to my career. I was taking it back, on my terms. No more silent guarantees. No more being the shadow voice behind the throne. No more translating chaos into clarity while others took the applause. This was a different chapter. One where the title didn't come from HR, it came from consequence. I looked down at my phone once more. 3 offers, 3 worlds waiting, and I hadn't even left the courtyard yet. There's something quiet and profound about holding your own keys. 3 weeks had passed since the collapse of the partnership summit. 3 weeks of carefully written exits, reshuffled press releases, and internal investigations that couldn't undo what had already been decided in silence. And me? I didn't return to the company. I didn't negotiate re-entry, or ask for reinstatement, or sit through apologies disguised as executive meetings. Instead, I signed the lease to a corner office on the 15th floor of a modest but sleek building in the financial district. Nothing flashy, just 3 glass walls, a private conference room, and 1 engraved plaque by the door. Keller Strategies. No department, no division, no CEO above me, just my name. And the quiet certainty that everything inside belonged to me. The vision, the authority, the consequences. The first thing I did was bring in my old project files, the ones I'd kept in careful order over the years, even when no one else saw their value. They weren't nostalgic. They were evidence. Proof that the architecture of international trust isn't built in boardrooms. It's built in the unspoken moments between people. Follow-ups, clarifications, precision. Now I was building something new, an international alliance structured under neutral leadership, not tied to one brand or country, but a rotating negotiation body with me at the center. I wasn't just leading a deal, I was setting the standard. And then, one quiet Thursday morning, he arrived. He didn't need an introduction. Tall, measured in every step, with that polished, timeless demeanor only Germans seem to master. Herr Sebastian Voigt, a senior representative from the Munich delegation and chief legal advisor to Drestor Industrial. He didn't come with fanfare, no entourage, just one assistant and a silver case containing the final version of our contract. When my receptionist brought him in, he walked toward me with the deliberate weight of someone delivering something important. He placed the case on the table and opened it carefully. Inside was a single document, thick, printed on fine-weight ivory stock, bound with a metal spine. But what made me pause wasn't the content, it was the cover. Strategic Energy and Infrastructure Pact, led by Maria Keller. My name. Not buried on page 47 in a technical appendix. Not hidden as project coordinator or facilitator. The title page. Voigt didn't smile, but his eyes carried approval. He slid the contract toward me and said in his steady accent, "We've waited a long time for this version of the agreement." He meant more than the words. I took the seat at the head of the table, my table now, and opened the contract. Every clause had passed through me, every term, every condition, every risk. I wasn't approving someone else's work, I was validating my own. Voight gestured to the chair beside me. Shall we? One by one, the other delegates began to arrive. Representatives from Singapore, Oslo, Sao Paulo, even a surprise guest from the UAE. No branding on the table but mine. No figure at the front but me. They didn't just accept it, they expected it. The tone was different now. There were no hushed glances or power plays, no positioning for visibility. Everyone at the table was here because they trusted the person sitting at the top, and this time, they weren't looking past me. They were looking to me. I signed the first page. The room remained silent. Then I passed the pen. The same model left on that now infamous boardroom table weeks ago. It wasn't symbolic. It was a reminder. This table, this project, this future began with my name. No one could remove it now. No clause needed to protect me. No device needed to validate my authority. I was the signature. The table was quiet. Not from awkwardness, not from tension, but from something far rarer in rooms like this. Peace. Real, solid, earned peace. Everyone had signed their respective pages except for one. The last signature line remained untouched, waiting for me. I reached for my pen, the one I'd always used, smooth, matte steel, gifted to me after my 5th international deal. But something else caught my eye. Something that didn't belong to me, but had once been meant for me. There, resting at the exact center of the table, was a pen. Black, slender, heavy-looking. And suddenly, I knew it. It was that pen. The one left on the table during the Collapse Summit. The pen Sao Paulo's delegation had set down before walking out, as a sign that no deal could proceed without me. No one had claimed it back. No one had taken it away. And now, somehow, it had made its way back to this room. Not on accident, not as decoration. It had been returned. I looked toward the delegation from Oslo, where Victor Halden gave me a quiet, firm nod. He didn't say much, just enough. It belongs to the one who kept the contract honest, he said. That sentence struck deeper than most speeches ever could. I glanced at the pen for a long moment before reaching out. It was cool to the touch, heavier than I remembered, the kind of weight that reminds you something matters. It wasn't just a pen anymore. It was a message, one that no longer said we won't sign without you, but we're signing because of you. I signed the final page. The ink flowed steady, clean, absolute. As soon as my name curved into its final letter, a kind of invisible tension in the room lifted. It was as though the signing itself had closed not just a legal loop, but something deeper, something emotional, almost spiritual. There were nods exchanged, papers shuffled, phones buzzed softly with confirmation alerts. Staff moved about the edges of the room, gathering copies and offering polite farewells, but no one rushed to leave. They stayed seated, not because they had to, but because they wanted to remain in this moment for just a few seconds longer. There was something undeniably significant about this, a shift, a signal that the old order had been cleared away and replaced by something that felt correct. I sat back, exhaling slowly. It wasn't relief, it was release. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't signing on behalf of someone else's agenda. I wasn't executing someone else's vision or representing a brand that didn't represent me back. This agreement, these people, this space, they were here because of me, not in spite of me, not because I fit the optics or because I was trusted enough to be in the room, but because I had built the room itself, quietly, carefully, completely. And now, I was sitting at the head of the table that no one could pull out from under me. I glanced again at the black pen. It lay on the surface like a symbol of something buried and risen again. Once a sign of silent protest. Now a token of returned trust. Victor caught my eye again, his expression unreadable, but not cold. Then, softly, he added one more sentence before standing to leave. You turned a closed door into your own entrance. That stayed with me long after they'd all gone. As the room emptied, I stayed seated, my hands folded lightly in front of me. For once, I didn't rush to the next meeting, the next call, the next task. I let myself feel it. The absence of fear, the absence of needing to watch my back, the absence of hierarchy pressing down like an invisible ceiling. For so long, my greatest strength had been knowing how to work behind the curtain, how to protect the company, stabilize deals, win trust, all without ever stepping into the center light. But something had changed in me the day Danielle pulled that stunt. It wasn't anger that shifted me. It wasn't even humiliation. It was clarity. I realized then that I had built something far more powerful than a track record. I had built trust capital, the kind that doesn't vanish with a title, the kind that reappears, stronger, when tested. I rose from my seat, gathered the final signed pages, and walked toward the side table where my assistant had placed a thin leather folder. As I slid the pages inside, I caught a glimpse of my name again on the title page: Maria Keller, lead negotiator and principal advisor. The name had always been there, but never with such quiet authority, never without tension, never without the feeling that someone else might pull the rug from under me. Now, no one could. And what mattered most was that I didn't win by revenge. I didn't tear anyone down. I didn't sabotage Danielle, or humiliate her, or plot her failure. I simply stepped back, allowed the truth to do its work, and then stepped into the space that had always waited for me, once everyone finally saw who had really been holding it together all along. This wasn't a full circle. It was something bigger. A completely new space, designed by me, filled with people who wanted me there, led by a voice that no longer needed permission to speak. I reached for the black pen once more and placed it in my drawer, not as a relic, but as a reminder of what fell apart, of what was rebuilt, and of who I became in the silence between.